The WWDC 2025 was this year's software milestone for Apple. It brought changes and additions across Apple's ecosystem, including iOS, macOS, and iPadOS. And while that sounds pretty much the same as previous years, this year's WWDC was a bit more special, as Apple seems to be preparing us for what appears to be a new era of Apple software. So in this video, we're going to dive deep into the most significant changes and additions to Apple software. We're going to discuss the major design updates and new features coming to Apple devices, and then we'll assess whether this is truly the beginning of a new era for Apple software. Lastly, we'll talk about what this might mean for the future. Let's start by talking about design. Design has always been a key area of focus for Apple across both hardware and software. It's based on a core value that many would argue Steve Jobs embedded within the Apple philosophy a long time ago. When it comes to software, we can clearly see an iOS design evolution, with the latest major release of iOS, iOS 26, being a major redesign from iOS 7 from 2013, which was in turn a major redesign from the early iterations of iPhone software, so that's from iPadOS 1 to iOS 6. Liquid glass is the embodiment of this new design philosophy which, as suggested by the name, embraces a glass-like design that is reminiscent of designs that were adopted by older operating systems, mainly Windows Vista and Windows 7. The interesting element here is that Apple has been criticized for what many consider to be a lazy design update that has not only been done by others like the Windows examples I just gave, but can also be replicated on Android devices with good old skin mods. At the same time though, there is also the perspective that Apple has taken an existing design foundation and identified potential in building on that foundation. If you consider iOS 7 and iOS 18, you'll find that even though they technically belong to the same design philosophy, iOS 18 still looks quite different from iOS 7, thanks to changes and improvements that were made to iOS during that time. So it's not far-fetched to suggest that Liquid Glass is a new design foundation that Apple will be building on in the coming years. Now, Apple is also focusing on increasing the harmony between its software design and its hardware. An example of this is through the more rounded design. The goal here is to accommodate the rounded corners of Apple devices, which, along with the interface, gives an opportunity for more content to be displayed thanks to the resulting additional space. As well as this design philosophy is unified across Apple devices, making it easier to switch between Apple devices. The idea here seems to be strengthening the Apple ecosystem and making it more connected by reducing the number of aspects that you would need to adjust or adapt to every time you need to use a different Apple device than the one you're currently using. Like if you need to switch from your iPad to your Mac, for example. Apple honestly deserves credit here because they're ticking the boxes by addressing this important part of their ecosystem. But there was more to this than just design. Along with the new design language came features that I personally wasn't expecting, but that I'm definitely happy to see because of how practical they are in day-to-day use. Features like call screening and live voicemail are very useful, especially if you're a busy person and can't answer every call you get, or in situations where you'd be waiting for an important phone call, or simply if you regularly get spam calls. Other features like live translation across messages and calls are also useful and help in making sure that you can understand another person if you're communicating in a different language, but it also makes it much faster to communicate with different people who speak different languages. The good thing about the new features is that most of them are not exclusive to just one Apple device, but instead you will be able to benefit from them whether you have an iPhone, iPad, or Mac. But let's talk a bit about macOS. macOS Tahoe makes way for features like live activities, which allow you to use your Mac to see the status of something you're doing on another Apple device, like an iPhone, and even manipulate that task from your Mac. Apple also brings updates to Spotlight and shortcuts. With Spotlight, you can now execute actions of your choice much more efficiently, and shortcuts now become capable of smarter actions and gain the ability to refer to Apple Intelligence to automate complex tasks. But whether or not Apple Intelligence will have reached the necessary level of intelligence by then is a different topic. I also wanted to talk about iPadOS 26, which perhaps sees the most significant updates of the bunch. Multitasking is now being taken to a whole different level. with Apple adding a windowing system for the iPad, which makes the iPad experience more similar to the Mac experience, so more like a computer. Now, this is something I'll be going back to a little later in the video. But in addition to this, multiple windows can now be opened, and so this takes greater advantage of the hardware capabilities of the newer iPad models. But Apple is not limiting this to the high-end iPads. Instead, this will be supported on any iPad running iPadOS 26. And similar to regular computers, you can now quickly see all your open windows spread out with Exposé, which helps to easily switch to the one you need. On top of this, you also get a menu bar. With this new menu bar, you can access the commands available in an app with a simple swipe down from the top of the display, or by moving your cursor to the top. You can also quickly find a specific feature or related tips in an app by using search in the menu bar. And if you're a developer, you will now be able to customize the menu bar in your own apps. Lastly, Apple is allowing us to get more out of our devices. Remember how I said earlier that Apple is now taking greater advantage of its hardware capabilities? Well, iPadOS 26 brings about the ability to perform heavy tasks in the background. So when you start a long-running process in an app, like exporting a long video project, background tasks will appear with live activities, giving you a clear understanding of what's happening and the ability to control and manipulate it. So you won't have to wait until that task is complete before moving on to something else. If you need to do something else in the meantime, now you can. So now that we've explored the most important changes and additions, let's try to see what this all adds up to. We've seen a strong focus on consistency, whether it's the naming across all devices, the design, or the features. We've also seen Apple reminding us multiple times that they have user privacy in mind, and that a lot of what they're doing is the result of them listening to us. So in other words, taking user feedback into consideration. The update also results in a stronger Apple ecosystem that uses a unified design language, which in turn brings about some benefits, most notably having more convenience for us as users, as there will be very little need to adapt to different Apple devices in the future. This design language is also more consistent with the hardware and makes better use of the available display space through the smarter interface. We're also seeing Apple starting to leverage its hardware more by making it so that software is more advanced and sophisticated, that it would need the kind of power that Apple Silicon offers, which not only increases harmony between software and hardware, but also gives us more advanced features that will help with productivity and with performing those heavier tasks. Overall, this was a combination of big and small updates and additions. When we take all of this as a whole, I personally think that Apple did a good job this year, especially for what will be the foundation that will be expanded in the coming years. Now, I did say earlier that there was an aspect that I wanted to discuss a bit more, and I sort of see that particular aspect as a potential problem for Apple going forward. What will happen now that iPadOS and macOS have been made more similar to each other? Is it possible that it will become harder for Apple to treat them as two separate devices? And what about us as customers? How do we go about deciding whether to buy an iPad or a Mac now that we have this update? But more importantly, what does all of this mean for the future of Apple software? The notion of a foundation obviously means that there will be room for more advanced features to be added in the future. One area that I see this potentially happening in is with the cross-use of Apple devices, like with live activities as we talked about earlier, but also with other features, like using AirPods to start a video recording. It wouldn't be surprising to see Apple adding more advanced features that build on these current features in the future. Of course, more advanced software will inherently require more power, and as Apple improves this next generation of software in future releases, we will need hardware that can keep up with the software needs. Apple has always been great when it comes to their SoCs across their devices, so I'm not particularly worried in that regard, but instead I'm curious to see just how powerful Apple can make its hardware in the next few years. Lastly, it'll definitely be interesting to see what Apple will be doing when it comes to the iPad and Mac devices. Do they try to create some separation again? Do they discontinue one of them? Do they create an all-new device that brings the best of both worlds? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share and subscribe. And feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything tech you're interested in and want me to make a video about. Also, please consider supporting me by donating to my channel through buymeacoffee.com. I would really appreciate any support as I continue to bring fun and interesting content like this, only if you can of course, link down below. This was the Wizard of Tech, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.